All right, well, let's get started then, folks. Thank you so much for making some time to be here this evening. Welcome to our Grow Geo Chicagoland Power Hour, our very first Power Hour of the program. My name is Jeff Schneider, and I'm with the Midwest Renewable Energy Association. We're also known as the MREA, and we are one of the three organizations who are administering the Grow Geo Chicagoland program. So we're going to be starting things off with a quick introduction to the chat function on Zoom, and then I will be passing things over to some of our Grow Geo team members to talk about geothermal heat pumps and the purchasing opportunity that you'll have through this program. So we're going to do a very quick intro to some of the Zoom functions. I know most of you folks have been on Zoom more than once at this point, but it's good to get us all on the same page. So throughout the presentation, I will be dropping in some links into the chat in Zoom that will be related to the information that John is discussing in the presentation. So to get to that chat, just hover over your Zoom window and click the chat button on the toolbar that will appear at the bottom there. So you'll be seeing some links from me going into the chat throughout the presentation. If you miss them and don't read them and then they're gone, don't worry about that. All the links that I'll be sharing will be also shared with you in a follow-up email that we'll be sending out to you folks. That should be sent within a business day, so probably tomorrow morning. But you also might want to check into your promotions folder when you're looking for that follow-up email, because it can sometimes end up there. But all the information that you get in the Power Hour, all the links, even a link to the recording of the Power Hour will all be in that follow-up email. So keep your eyes open for that. So the chat will also serve as a communication tool, because although you can see and hear us, we can't see or hear you. So if you have questions about the information that you're hearing in the presentation, go ahead and drop them into the chat. And we will answer them if we can in the chat right there. But if they're more technical questions, we may leave them to the end for a Q&A session where our geothermal expert, John, will be able to give maybe some more in-depth answers there. So if you're going to ask a question in the chat, we do suggest that you click the little blue bar right above where you type and select everyone. That way, if you ask a question, everyone can see the question, and maybe someone else had that very same question. So it's always good to make sure everyone is able to see your question. All right, so towards the end of the webinar, I will be dropping a link into the chat that will link to our online form that allows you to request the site assessment and cost estimate. So the sort of signing up for the program. That link will also be in the follow-up email, but if you're excited about what you heard and want to get signed up right away, you'll get that link in the chat in 40 minutes to an hour near the end of the presentation. Okay. Thanks for that, letting me go through that intro, folks. Now that I've gone through the basics, I just want to say that the purpose of this Geothermal Power Hour is to provide you with a high-quality education about geothermal heat pump technology, and also introduce you to an opportunity to purchase at a price that's lower than what you might find on the market. So all these details will be discussed in the webinar. One last reminder, drop those questions in the chat and we'll try and get to you either during the presentation or after the end in an FAQ. With that, I will pass things over to my friend John, and he'll tell you about our geothermal heat pump program. Take it away, John.
Thanks, Jeff. Hello, everyone. I see we've got a big group for tonight's Power Hour. It looks like 80, I see 87 in my toolbar signed in, and it looks like more coming. Jeff, I see a couple people have raised hands. You might want to check on that and deal with that in the chat function. So welcome to Grow Geo Chicagoland. This is our first Power Hour for this program, and this is a group buy opportunity for geothermal heat pumps. Some of you may know what a group buy is. A group buy has been used for solar PV systems for about the past 4 or 5 years. And we've been doing programs like this downstate. This isn't the first one, but it is the first one of its kind in the Chicago region. So we hope you learned something tonight, and that'll be a good thing. So we've got a 3-pronged partnership here with Grow Geo Chicagoland, the organization that I head up, the Geothermal Alliance of Illinois, MREA, the Midwest Renewable Energy Association, and the Citizens Utility Board, or CUB, as Jeff said. These are the contractors, and we'll we'll give you this information later in the slide deck. But these are the contractors who, out of the box, are involved in this group buy program, and we'll share this with you later. Before we get into it, I want to turn things over to Marina from CUB, and she's going to say a few words about the Citizens Utility Board. Marina?
Yeah, thank you, John. Thank you, Jeff, for getting us started, and thank you everyone for showing up for this Power Hour tonight. Tonight's Power Hour is specifically sponsored by CUB, so I'm really happy to see so many people on CUB's list coming out and wanting to learn more about geothermal. That's pretty exciting. For any of you who need a reminder of who CUB is, we are a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization that works to represent ratepayers across the state of Illinois. So we really focus on consumer protections within the utility space. What that means is trying to keep your rates low. We make sure people are avoiding scams, and we really want to make sure everyone is aware of options when it comes to saving money on their bills and saving energy in general. So a couple of our resources that we're pretty proud of. We have our hotline that you can call weekdays 9 to 5 if you ever have any questions or complaints about your utility. We're able to assist you in filing a formal complaint, and we can answer a lot of your questions. Specifically, even if you have a question about this program or geothermal or any other type of renewable or any type of alternative energy, you're able to reach out to us there. We also have our website, citizensutilityboard.org. We have lots of different fact sheets and guides on gas and electric related topics. And then I am part of the outreach team. So we do a lot of outreach throughout the year on those topics. Again, really wanting to make sure that people know their options when it comes to energy. Overall, we really do advocate for clean and affordable energy. And the solar group buys were mentioned. CUB has worked with the MREA for the past few years on solar group buys in the Chicagoland area. So we're really, really excited to partner up with MREA again and GAOI so that we can start doing geothermal group buys in the area. Geothermal is really great because it has great potential for energy savings and therefore cost savings. So we're really excited to be part of this program and give people, an easier way to learn about the basics, benefits, and incentives for geothermal. And for those of you who are really interested, even an avenue to actually install a geothermal system. So yeah, without further ado, I'll throw it back to John. And again, thank you for coming tonight, everyone.
Thanks, Marina. So here's today's agenda. Before we get into the program, I will tell you that we're gonna move pretty quickly, and the program itself will take about an hour, and then we'll have some time for questions at the end. I should tell you a little bit about myself, just for disclosure purposes, if you would. I'm an old utility guy. I worked in the electric cooperative field pretty much my whole career, retired from that in 2017. But back in 2008, I was pretty instrumental in the startup of my organization, the Geothermal Alliance of Illinois. And I would say it's probably fair to call me an energy geek. I've been a renewable energy and energy efficiency advocate for a long time. I actually put geothermal in my own home. I live in Springfield. I put a geothermal in my own home in 1999. So I've been living with geothermal in my own home since then, really about 24 years. My actual indoor unit is about 8 or 10 feet away from where I'm sitting right now. And you're going to see pictures of it in a little bit later in the slide deck. I've also have solar in my own house. And so I'm well on my way to having a net zero energy home, which is pretty darn good for a house that was built in 1961. It's about as good as it can be without knocking it down and starting over. There, that's out of the way. Here's today's agenda. We're going to talk a little bit about the group buy. I'm going to basically do a geothermal 101, telling you how geothermal heating and cooling works. We're going to talk a little bit near the end about the cost and savings incentives and how the group buy works, and then a little bit about the health and environmental benefits from decarbonization and geothermal. So here's a good place to start. What's a geothermal group buy? Well, again, we mentioned earlier that there have been solar group buys going on for about the last 5 or 6 years, I think, with quite a bit of success. You'll see there's 2 shaded blue areas in the state. Those are the other 2 geothermal group buys that I've been involved in. We started one with the city of Urbana 2 years ago. So we have 2 years behind us with that program in 3 counties in central Illinois. And then we just started one last fall over in the Galena area with the electric cooperative up there, Joe Carroll Energy. And then you see the yellow shaded area, which is obviously densely populated areas in the Chicagoland region. And that's pretty much the footprint for this program, Grow Geo Chicagoland. I won't read everything on the slide, but essentially the program goes through the end. This program is heavy on outreach. We want to introduce geothermal heating and cooling technology to more people. We want to educate more people, and we want to get more people to put geo in their own homes and businesses. So here's just a bit more about the program. Through this program, you can rest assured that you're connected with a contractor that's been vetted and certified by GAOI. I know every one of the contractors in this program, I've personally tested their employees. And so I'm pretty confident that we're working with extremely good contractors, and that is very, very important. And you'll learn more about why that's so important as we go. So why should you even think about putting geothermal in your home or your business? Well, if you want to pay less for your heating and cooling, it's important in that regard. Typically, most geothermal systems result in energy savings, cost savings of roughly 50% or more, sometimes more, but usually about 50% cut in heating and cooling costs. But even maybe more importantly, from an environmental standpoint, with decarbonization of the homes, we reduce greenhouse gases and reliance on fossil fuels because there is no fossil fuel with geothermal heating and cooling. And it's frankly the best way. It is the most efficient heating and cooling technology today. Nothing else is even close. Frankly, it's almost not a fair comparison. And we'll tell you why here in a moment. So here's the start of the Geothermal 101, if you would. I always like to start with this picture because we can have savings, we can have decarbonization, we can have all these environmental factors that are really good. But at the end of the day, if you don't have comfort, you don't have anything. And comfort is really important. And I can tell you that the folks who live in my house are the biggest salespeople for geothermal because they like the comfort that it gives. And I like this picture because it tells me that it's heating season. But you notice the family, most of them are barefooted and they look pretty doggone comfortable, even though they're wearing sweaters. So I like this picture. Now, geothermal is called many different things in different parts of the country. You might hear the term geo exchange, geothermal heat pump. I think out in the East, they call it earth-coupled heat pumps, ground source heat pumps, pretty common. In Illinois, we just find that everybody referred to it as geothermal. And no, it's not Hot Rocks geothermal, and it's not geothermal energy production. That's out in California and Nevada. And it's not Old Faithful, but it's taking lower temperature energy from out of the ground and using it. And it is renewable energy. And it's renewable energy as defined by the federal government. I like to think of geothermal as being the one technology that's both energy efficiency and renewable energy. And why is it renewable energy? If you take away one thing from tonight and remember one thing, remember this. This is somewhat complicated technology, but at the end of the day, geothermal does 2 things. It pumps water and it blows air to make heat and cool. Makes heat in the winter and keeps your home or business cool in the summer. And it does that by pumping water and blowing air. I'm oversimplifying things, but that's what geothermal systems do. This is an important slide. Actually, the next couple are important slides. And why is this so important? Well, we know that the Earth is a vast solar collector. At the end of the day, that's what the Earth is. It collects energy all day long. When the sun is shining, the Earth is collecting energy. You know, those of you, I'm sure there's a few on the call, there's 100 people on this call right now. I'm sure some of you probably have a solar array. And you know that even on the darkest and dreariest days of November and December, you're getting a little bit of solar energy production out of your solar system. Not a lot, not as much as in June and July and May on the real sunny days, but you're still getting some energy. And that same energy is going in and heating the Earth, giving the Earth the energy. And geothermal just takes advantage of that. Remember, we pump water and we blow air, and I'm going to show you how we do that. This is a real important slide, a very important slide. So I want you to look at where we are. Now, where I am in central Illinois in Springfield, our underground earth temperatures are typically about 54 degrees. If I went over and looked at my geosystem right now, I'd see that the incoming water temperature feeding my system would be about 54 to 54.5 degrees of incoming water temperature. Probably in Chicago, I'm going to guess that the incoming water temperatures there would be a little cooler, maybe 51 or 52 degrees. And I like to say that this part of the country is the absolute sweet spot for geothermal. Well, why is that? Well, think about if you're in southern Florida or southern Texas, down there where the earth temperatures are in the 70s. What are you trying to do almost on a year-round basis in that part of the world? You're trying to cool. You're very, very seldom ever heating. You're cooling most of the time. And what does geothermal do? It takes the heat in cooling mode and injects it, puts it into the ground. So you're putting heat into ground that's already a lot hotter than it is in central Illinois, and you're doing it on an almost year-round basis. Conversely, if you're in northern Minnesota or Canada, look at the earth temperatures there. You're in the low 40s, maybe even in the upper 30s into Canada. And what are you doing there? You're not really cooling very much, maybe for a month or so in the summer. For the most part, you're heating almost all the time. So what are you doing? Again, you're taking heat out of the loop or out of the ground, and the ground's already much colder to start with. We're in the sweet spot right here in the middle part of the country because we fluctuate back and forth. We take heat out of the ground in heating mode in the winter, and then we inject heat back into the ground in the summer, and we toggle back and forth, and we're right in that sweet spot where we've got a very good source of energy in the 50-degree range to draw from. So we're just in the perfect spot for geothermal. We know that the earth is a source of heating in the winter. Again, I just said that. And it's a place to reject heat in the summer. How do we do that? We do that with geothermal technology, typically with sealed underground piping, a closed loop system using piping that looks just like this. This is an actual piece of pipe, same that I've got in my front yard. This is typical 1.25" HDPE pipe, and that piping has fluid that is circulated through it. Now, there's many different ways to do geothermal, but that's by far and away the most popular way. Think about this slide. If I said to every one of you, and there's over 100 of you on this call now, that if you gave me $1, I'd give you $5 back, would you take that deal? Every one of you would take that deal, and that would be a very expensive evening for me. And this slide demonstrates how that works. For every unit of electricity purchased from the grid, in most cases from ComEd up in northern Illinois, you get 5 to 6 units of energy kilowatt hours, if we're talking about kilowatt hours, for the geothermal system. So most of it is absolutely free energy that's absorbed from the earth. And that's why you get over $5 worth of energy for every $1 that you spend. Remember what I said earlier? What geothermal systems really do is they pump water and blow air. There's no fuel, no fossil fuels that are burned in a furnace to provide heating in the summer. There's no extra air conditioning unit that is taking heat to the outside air. The geothermal system is taking care of everything, and the geo system is pumping water and blowing air to move that energy, simply move that energy into your home or business. Now, most people think that this is brand new technology. Again, I'm old, and I told you that I put geo in my own home in 1999. Actually, the office that I worked in for many, many, many years had geothermal in it when I came to Illinois back in 1985. And geo is not new technology. If you look at this Life magazine from back in 1948, this magazine had that article in it, something called the fireless furnace. To a great extent, this was the first geothermal system. This was some guy who decided he was going to build his own geothermal heat pump, and they learned the hard way that metal piping in the ground doesn't last, etc. But for all intents and purposes, this was an early geothermal heat pump system, and the system actually worked. So I used the terminology geothermal heat pump system. Most of you have probably heard of a heat pump. And when you hear the term heat pump, you're usually thinking about an air source heat pump. That's the more common type of heat pump. Geothermal is much like an air source heat pump in that both you just move energy from one location to another, much like a refrigerator takes heat out of the inside of the refrigerator and sends the heat to the exterior, much like an air conditioner takes the heat and humidity from your home and takes it and puts it into the air. Geothermal does the same thing, except it exchanges the heating in air conditioning mode down into the Earth's natural temperature, and in heating mode in the summer, it takes heat out of the ground. So I simply ask you this: what's the more efficient exchange? Exchanging into 50-degree Earth temperature when it's 95 degrees outside, hot and humid, and you're trying to put that heat into 95-degree air, or putting that heat into 52 or 53-degree Earth temperatures? And then conversely, what's the more efficient way to extract heat out of outside temperatures that are pretty decent today? But how about when it's 5 below zero? How much heat can you take out of -5-degree air? Underground, we know no season. It's always the same. It's always in the 50s. So I just follow common sense of what the easier, more efficient exchange is. And that's the wonder of geothermal heating and cooling. Again, these next two slides are very important for me to try to share with you and get you to understand how a geothermal system operates. So typically, every geothermal system in a home or a business consists of 4 important circuits. Everyone consists of 3. Most consist of 4. I'll explain. The first system is the distribution circuit. In most homes, that's the circuit of ductwork that distributes the air through the home. In some homes that have hot water heating, it would be the piping that distributes the conditioned air through the home to heat the home. But in most homes, that's your ductwork system, okay? The second important circuit is the refrigerant circuit. This is the refrigerant. The refrigerant circuit is in the geothermal unit itself, and I'll show you pictures in a moment. And this is the system that takes the incoming water temperature, extracts heat out of it, and then uses refrigerant to basically expand and multiply that to make comfortable air, comfortable heating in the winter and cooling in the summer. And that's the refrigerant circuit. The next circuit is the ground loop circuit. Again, remember the piping, this stuff right here. That's the piping in most geothermal systems that's either put into the ground horizontally or vertically, and then fluid circulates through this piping, and there's a pump that pumps the fluid to and from the geothermal unit. And then lastly is the hot water circuit. And this is the one that isn't necessarily in every geothermal system. It should be in every geothermal system, at least in the residential sector, but occasionally you see large commercial installations that don't utilize the desuperheater for making hot water. And why is it important to make hot water? Well, it's a free byproduct, and making domestic hot water in most homes is usually the second largest user of energy, up to 25% of energy use for making hot water. And so you want to take advantage of that free byproduct. So it's important to say that all of these circuits are closed and sealed from the others. None of the fluids mix from one to the next. In other words, the desuperheater that heats hot water, that water does not intermingle with the fluid that's in the loop field, nor does it intermingle with the fluids that are in the refrigeration circuit. None of them, they're all sealed off from one another. However, it's essential that they all work together to make the system operate properly. Again, this is a bit redundant, but it's important, so I want to reiterate this. And that's that for every unit of energy from the utility company, you wind up with 5 units of energy into your home. In other words, you exchange $1 for $5. Everybody would do that. And that's because these systems pump water and blow air. The energy is already underground. We're simply moving it and taking advantage of the Earth's free energy. This is my Geo system. This is my home in Springfield, Illinois. So on the left, you see my Geo unit. Looks to a great extent real similar to a typical furnace, except you see the piping there on towards the right side. It's got 2 pipes, one coming in, one going out. And then you see that black box sort of in the middle there on the right side. That's the pump. That's the pumping system that actually pumps the fluid through the loop field, bringing that energy into my home. And then you see on the outside, you see the lawn there around the corner between the burning bush and that green bush coming right towards you. That's where my loop field is. And I've got a loop field that looks almost exactly like this, except my loops are 175 feet deep. And these loops are 15 inches deep, this little bitty model. But much the same exact thing, same exact piping, just bigger and deeper, but a system that looks essentially just like this is in my front yard. My loop field is 175 feet in depth. It was put in the winter of 1999, has been chugging along, operating just perfectly ever since, and will be operating for many, many, many years, maybe nearly forever, just the same way as it is now. And it's important for you to understand how geothermal systems are rated, especially if you look into getting a geosystem, because you can get more efficient units, just like you can get more efficient furnaces, more efficient heat pumps, air source heat pumps. You can get more and less efficient geothermal systems. Even the least efficient geothermal system is great. There are no bad ones. They're all really good. And some at the higher end of the market are nothing short of incredible. So we rate geothermal 2 ways. In cooling mode, we use EER. Now, most of you have never heard of EER, but you have probably heard of SEER, or commonly called SEER ratings. So if you buy a new air conditioning system, a new central air conditioner, the heating cooling company will probably tell you, well, we could sell you a 14 SEER or a 16 SEER or a 18 or a 22 SEER. Those are the higher end central air conditioner systems. Why don't we use SEER for geothermal? Well, we don't use SEER because there is no season underground. Underground knows no season. It's the same year round. Once we get down 6 or 7 feet underground, it's the same year round. It's the same in December as it is in January, as it is in July. It never changes. So we use EER because it's steady. It never changes. That's the beauty of geo. And then in heating, we use coefficient of performance, or COP. What you should remember with both EER and COP is that the higher the number, the more efficient the system. And so here's a bar chart that gives you an idea of the efficiency. Here's cooling. So you see the newest geothermal systems, the dark green, they have EERs that are above 30 now. And those are very efficient systems. My system in my own home is probably more like the lime green color there, the second one over, probably more in the 25, 26 EER range. And then you see the efficiency for a really high-end heat pump or high efficiency air conditioning. And then your typical central air conditioner, probably something more like a 14 SEER air conditioner on the left. You see the efficiency in cooling is no comparison. And then in heating, measured by COP, this is where geothermal really shines. And especially in a climate area like Chicago, we're still much more heating than cooling dominated on a year-round basis. So it's even more important here. And you see the efficiencies of the new geothermal equipment on the left end. And then way over on the other end would be your ordinary old school gas or propane furnace, maybe an 80% efficient gas furnace from the past. There's just absolutely no comparison here between the technologies. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the loop types, because there's numerous different ways to do geothermal, and we want to cover all of them. Now, in Illinois, closed loop systems are dominant by far, probably 98, 99% of all geothermal is a closed loop system. Again, that's a system where you have piping like this, either in the ground horizontally or vertically, like the one in my front yard that isn't far from where I'm sitting. And it uses piping, and the fluid that circulates through that loop field is the same fluid over and over and over. It never changes. It circulates on pretty much a year-round basis, and that fluid never leaves. It's closed, it's sealed. And those systems can be horizontal, they can be vertical. Vertical is the most popular by far, or they could be placed in a pond. But you could have, remember I said 98 or 99%, you could have an open loop system. These are not that common in Illinois, but they are common in certain parts of the state, like primarily river towns like Rockford, Dubuque, places like that, the Quad Cities, where you have rivers usually going right through downtown areas and right through the cities. And in those type of systems, they work very, very well and open loop, because you can drill a well, typically a shallow well right near the river, extract the water out of the well. It's no different than any other well. You extract the water, take heat out of the water in the winter, or inject heat back into it in cooling, and then pump the water into the river. And the water is just a little bit cooler in the winter, and it's a little bit hotter in the summer, and that's an open well system. But for most of us, we're talking about loops, closed loop systems. And for most of the closed loop systems, probably 85 to 90% of all geothermal in Illinois, these are vertical loop fields, just like the one in my front yard, just like the one in this schematic. And this is what it would look like on installation. You have a boring rig come in, just much like a water well drilling rig, comes in, drills a hole in the earth to the prescribed depth, whatever the recipe or the design of the system calls for. And those depths would be for residences anywhere from 100 to 200 feet is very common, but they can be much deeper than that. There are bore fields in Illinois and the Chicago region as deep as I know of 800 footers. But real common for residential applications would be 125 to 200 feet. Again, mine in my own home are 175 feet deep. And then when that borehole is dug to the prescribed depth, the piping is dropped into the hole, and almost immediately that borehole is grouted with a bentonite grout. And this is important for two reasons. Number one, when we've bored into the earth at those kind of depths, we've exposed the aquifer to potential pollution. So we want to reseal that. And that's really important, number one. And number two, we use bentonite grout to backfill. And we do that by law in Illinois from the bottom on up, sealing that borehole just super tightly with the bentonite grout. And the bentonite grout has much greater conductivity than sand or earth or anything else that you could use. The bentonite grout just makes the geothermal system work that much better. So it's important to grout for two reasons, and all vertical loop fields in Illinois have to be grouted by code. So this is what an existing retrofit installation might look like with the outside work. See a crew that's drilling the vertical loops, putting the vertical loops in. This is what it might look like in new construction. This is actually a friend of mine building this home in Springfield. He did geothermal. You see the house is still under construction. That's about 5 or 6 years ago. And geo system is there, still operating great. This is how many people it takes to put in a geothermal loop field. That's as funny as I'm going to get tonight. That's my feeble attempt at humor. This actually was a training session where we were teaching HVAC contractors what it's like to put a loop field in, because normally they don't do that. They do the inside part of the work. And then the drilling contractors typically put in the outside loop field. So these guys were there learning about loop field installation. This is what the bottom of the loop looks like down at the bottom of the borehole. And then there's another way that we can put in loops, and this is getting more popular, and this is with a boring machine. And these loops can be put in horizontally, diagonally, a number of different ways, but typically the recipe is just the same as with a bored loop field as it would be with a drilled loop field. You put in the same amount of loop, you grout at the conclusion, and typically for a home, a bore field might be 3 to 4 bores of 150 to 200 feet of pipe in length. And these are pictures from a loop that's being put in this way. This is getting more popular all the time. What are some of the advantages of doing it this way? Well, it's a little bit neater. You don't do quite as much tearing up of yards with a directional boring machine. And we've all seen directional boring machines. They're typically along the road putting in sewers and fiber optics and water lines and things like that. They use that same exact equipment just to put in a horizontally bored or a diagonally bored geothermal loop field. And you see here, they've got the loop down in the lower left corner that they've already installed, getting ready, it looks like, to put the second loop in. And then they're going to tie into the home in the background, and they're going to typically make a little hole in the wall, drill a little hole in the wall or the floor. This one's bigger than most. Usually it's much smaller than that, and up pop the pipes coming into the home, and they connect the pipes to the geo system to make it work. Putting in loops horizontally is another way that works. They work perfectly well. This wouldn't be common in like a residential neighborhood. This would be more common out in the country. Say you were going to build a brand new home on 3 or 4 or 5 acres and you have plenty of space and you don't have a finished lawn, you can come in with a trencher or a backhoe and put the loops in horizontally. You need a little more loop in this application, and you typically install those loops at depths of 6, 7, 8 feet in the ground. But it's less expensive this way, but you do an incredible amount of tearing up of a yard. So you usually don't do this in a finished yard, and definitely not in a neighborhood, because you usually wouldn't have enough yard to handle this. And then lastly, as I mentioned, you can put loops in a pond. Now, most of us don't have a pond in our backyard, and usually we don't have a pond that's large enough. But for those people who do have a pond that's big enough and deep enough on a year-round basis, putting the loops in the bottom of the pond can work perfectly fine. Here's a picture from a really vintage old home. This house was built in the 1960s, or excuse me, the 1860s, south of Springfield, an old farm home from back in the Civil War era. And this is a good example of how geothermal can work virtually anywhere. You might hear people saying, maybe it's a heating, cooling contractor, usually one who doesn't do geothermal or doesn't do it very well, says, oh, geothermal's not for existing houses, that's for new construction. Or you might hear somebody say, oh, that just can't work in retrofit applications. Well, that's not really true. You can make geothermal work in virtually any application, but some are easier and more obvious than others. In this one, this house was built in the 1860s. It's pretty much a classic residential retrofit. It's just that it's done in a really old home. You see the unit down in the lower left with the silver and blue. That's a water furnace unit. I can recognize it. And it's connected. It's much like a furnace, except it's got piping connected to it, right? And you see the white box with the black circles right just left of center. That's the flow center. That's the pumping system. In other words, 2 pipes coming from the outside, one coming in, one going out, and that's pumping that fluid over for the geothermal unit to take energy from that fluid and then sending it back on a return trip through the closed loop into the earth. And then you see, lastly, you see the 2 water heaters over on the right-hand side of the picture. And this is the classic installation for a geothermal system, taking the free energy that is waste heat, if you would, and preheating water in that smaller buffer tank. And then the larger tank is the main water heater that's providing the water throughout the home. That's your classic installation. A little more on this. Here's another one. As I mentioned earlier tonight, domestic hot water, heating domestic hot water is almost always the second largest user of energy in any home. And especially for bigger families with lots of kids, lots of laundry, heating water can be a pretty significant user of energy. And that's why you want to take advantage of that free energy for making domestic hot water with geothermal. The next 2 slides, really important to remember. Okay, going back to the beginning. Remember, geo isn't all that complicated. We pump water and we blow air. But there are some things that have to be done the right way, or it is going to be a really hard fight to make a system operate the right way. But if you do it the right way in the beginning, you have a great system that operates just wonderfully. The load calculation is the vital first step. Now, with any heating and cooling system being put into a home or a business, a good first step is running a load calculation. What does that mean? That means going through the facility that you want to condition and going room by room in your home, going through all the bedrooms, the kitchen, the living room, all the living spaces of the home, taking measurements and calculating what the heating and cooling requirements for that home are. Much the same for a commercial facility. And it's not guessing at it. It's not kind of what is it. It's knowing exactly what it is. That's a vital first step. And then you take the data that comes from that load calculation and you design the geothermal heating and cooling system, and you run what I call the energy analysis. That's just the terminology I use. Any good geothermal contractor does both of these things, and doing both of these things should be an absolute requirement. You can't guess on either one of them. You can't guess that, oh, it's this many BTUs and it'll be a 4-ton and that'll take care of the system. Well, maybe it will. You can't guess at that. The data that comes through this energy analysis is always conservative and always extremely accurate when it's done in conjunction with a load calculation that's done properly by an energy professional. These systems are spot on every time when they're done by professionals. And it's really important because if you don't have the system sized the right way, if you oversize a system, well, it'll cost a lot more for installation, number one, and you won't get proper dehumidification in the summer, number two. And if you undersize the system, well, you're going to get to heating season in the winter, and most people with an undersized system aren't going to be very happy because they're either going to be very cold or they're going to pay a lot for backup heat to meet the heating cooling requirements. So you want a system that's designed the right way and sized the right way. So we want to talk a little bit about how much geothermal costs and what the incentives are. Now, we can't tell you exactly what a system will cost because you could never say that, because every system is really different. And we'll explain a little bit more about that. But with this group buy, this is how our group buy works. And for example only, and this gets you in the ballpark if you're trying to determine how expensive geothermal is, for example. We're using the example price in the Chicagoland region of $12,000 a ton. And so one of the benefits of going through this program is that at the end of the year, when the program's all finished and we tally up and how many systems did we do and how many tons of geothermal did we install? Well, if we hit the goal on the right side of that graph, everybody who participates in the program is going to get $150 a ton back. So for most typical installations of 4 or 5 tons, let's just say 4 tons, for example, those folks are going to get a check for $600 back at the conclusion of the program. If they put in a bigger system, the money will be more. If we don't hit that metric on the right side, you see the different metrics there on the discount for fewer. I'm fairly confident we'll hit that metric, though we do in the other programs that I've been involved in, and I'm pretty sure we'll hit that metric. Again, I mentioned that every home is different, so it's really hard to say this is how much geothermal will cost in your house, because every house will need something different. Every loop field will be different. The size of a geothermal system would be different in every house. And then there are a number of other things. You might need an electric panel upgrade. You might need backup heating. You might need surge protection. You might need a new hot water heater. There are all kinds of things that go into making every geo installation unique. And so you really need to get a proper quote for every system that would go in. But our example gives you a general idea. So there are some really vibrant incentives available right now. These are the tax credits that are available from the federal government. There's also some incentives, much smaller ones, that'll be coming from the state of Illinois. The rules haven't been written yet, but in general, the big incentive is the 30% federal tax credit. That's a tax credit. It's the same tax credit that you would get for a solar or wind installation, and it's 30%. It's not a tax deduction, a tax credit, and that's in place for essentially the next 10 years. And I'm not going to read everything here. In addition, there's the $2,000 home efficiency tax credit, and you can get more information at online at Energy Star or the IRS, or most good contractors can share information about the incentives. Here's how the money might work on a typical average installation. I will say that the two pictures of the homes on the right are systems that are homes in the Urbana-Champaign area that had geosystems put in the first 2 years of the program there in the group by there. So those are geothermal heating and cooled homes in Urbana-Champaign. So we're taking a typical 4-ton system. Again, my house in Springfield is 2,950 square feet, a ranch built in 1961. I've got a 4-ton system in my house. That's pretty typical in an average type home. And you see the market install cost. Again, that's not a quote. That's just a good starting point. Might be in that ballpark of $48,000. You back out the Grow Geo rebate, assuming we hit our metric. You back out the ComEd Geo rebate of $1,500 per ton. That's another $6,000. You back out the 30% federal tax credit and the home energy efficiency tax credit. And now you're down to a real cost of really $24,000, just a tad under $25,000. And so here's a little more information. So you see what a comparable natural gas furnace would probably be more money than that. We're probably being a little overly conservative here, probably closer to 15,000, 14 or 15,000, but let's be conservative and say 12,000. So under this scenario, you see what the additional investment would be. And if you're simply looking at this from a dollars and cents standpoint, you see $12,000, $12,800 in incremental investment. And so the question is, how long does it take to pay that back in terms of energy savings? Now, most paybacks on residential geothermal back in the day were in the 3 to 6 year range. What I've been seeing is maybe 3 to 7 years, 3 to 8 years, something like that. And again, there's a lot of variables. It all depends on the cost of gas. Most of you probably saw what happened with gas prices in the past year with the Ukraine situation, et cetera. Gas prices have been very high, so it helps the payback much more quickly. But this just gives you an idea of what the dollars would look like. From an efficiency standpoint and reducing your energy bill, you see that a geothermal system is the red bar there on everything. Geothermal is just more efficient on everything. It's more efficient in heating, cooling, making hot water, operating the fan of the system for a forced air system, running the fan to circulate the air through the ductwork, and total cost. Again, I mentioned earlier that usually operating costs are cut in half. That's about what that bar looks like right there. So that gives you an idea of what energy savings and dollar savings might look like. Typically, your home will be worth more. Your home will be greener, and I think, I'm pretty certain I'm correct here, as time goes on, energy is going to be even more important 3 or 5 years from now than it is right now. And that's going to make homes that are efficient and take advantage of renewable technologies that are green, that's going to be even more desirable from a sales standpoint, if you would. There are real significant health and environmental benefits to geothermal. Geothermal reduces global warming pollution. It just does. I'm fond of saying that if we want to do anything about greenhouse gases in the residential sector, the heating and cooling sector, there's really only 3 significant ways we can do it. Putting in LED lights is a really good idea. But once it's done and it's over, and it's a rather modest energy efficiency improvement. But how do we meet that goal? Well, we meet it in three ways. You make your building envelope more efficient. You tighten up your home. You let less heat get out, escape from your home in the winter, and less heat in the summer. You make your home more efficient. That's way number one. Way number two is you decarbonize with a heat pump, and the geothermal is the most efficient way to meet that by far. Nothing else even close. And then lastly, you produce some or all of the energy for that geothermal heating and cooling system with solar. You do those three things like I've done in my home, and you get to net zero energy with your home. And that's the way to reduce your carbon footprint in a really significant way. And it's really the only way to really get there in a big way with today's technology. So we know that this is really important. If you follow in the media, you know this is coming to the heartland, and it'll be here sooner than later. It's just this week in New York City, there was a proposal to ban natural gas, putting natural gas into new construction in buildings. I'm not sure if it got approved. I read it in the media this week, but that is happening more and more all over. And it will happen here too, because taking care of our climate is really important. And the only way we can do that with residential homes, which are responsible for 30-some% of the climate pollutants, the only way we can get there is by decarbonizing. And the best way is with geothermal, as we mentioned. So really important. Another environmental benefit is reducing indoor air pollution. This should be really important to everybody, especially in homes where you have folks with asthma or breathing issues, or you have young children. I have 6 grandchildren. You see my granddaughter's artwork behind me on the wall. They say, "Grandpa, you do TV programs all the time. We want people to see our pictures." Well, that's really important to me. And it's important that they breathe clean air because they're in the home a lot. And so we just know if you take all that combustion out of a home, the air quality is so much improved. So here's some easy steps. I'm not going to read this entire slide, but this is like from beginning to end. So you see on the very beginning, getting started, well, what's step number 1? Sign up online to put yourself on the list, so to speak. And then you can select a contractor from the 6 that we've got in the program now. My hunch is 2 months from now, we'll probably have a few more contractors in the program. But for now, we've got 6 contractors, 6 really good contractors. And then you see the process here from beginning to end. Pretty straightforward. I will tell you that putting in a geothermal system doesn't happen just like that. It's a process that takes a bit. It takes a few months to put a loop field in. There has to be a permit that's approved through the county health department for the loop field. It takes a while to get the loop field put in. Equipment needs to be ordered. It's not just a matter of calling the heating cooling contractor and having a new air conditioner system put in. It's not that easy, and it's not as quick as you might be able to get with just a simple replacement of replacing A with a new version of A. This is a more time-consuming installation, so be prepared for that. And so what are the next steps? Well, the next step would be really filling out the site assessment form. Jeff mentioned that earlier in the call. It'll be in the chat, and I think every participant is going to get an email following this program, and you'll see that a site assessment form. And if you're sitting there tonight and you say, I don't know that this is for me, that's fine. Don't fill out the form. If you want more information and you think you're interested, fill out the form. You have no commitment there. It's just the first step in the program. And I want to thank you for attending. I see my friend David Weaver from Cub has joined in here as we've gotten started, and Jeff's contact info is there. You'll see my email address. I will tell you that if anyone has any questions, I'm available anytime. I have no problem with taking phone calls. I guess my phone number isn't on the screen here, but if you have a pen handy, you can write it down. It's 217-971-3533, or you can email me at any of these links, and I will be glad to address any question geothermal related, or I'll take a stab at anything else as well. If you're interested in how geothermal and solar work together in a home that was built in 1961, I'm pretty sure I can tell you a little about that because I've had that combination for 10 years now. So, questions. Jeff, what do we have?
Well, we have a whole boatload of questions over here, John. This has been wonderful, folks. Thank you so much for being here. I am aware some folks may be dropping off because we are past 8 o'clock. So if that's you, thank you so much for taking some time to learn about our geothermal heat pump group buy. We're glad to have you, and we hope that you sign up or request to learn more. For anyone who can stay for a couple minutes, we're going to do our best to get through this list of questions. I will say, folks, it's been a lot. We've had dozens of questions, so we'll do our very best to get through them. I'll try and ask questions that I sort of saw multiple people ask similar questions and get those out of the way, but I figured we'll probably cut things off, maybe in about 20 minutes or so, but we'll stay on for a bit to ask some questions and I'll get started. So a lot of these are probably going to be for you, John, but I know, David, you're also very knowledgeable to answer some of these questions. So a lot of folks are asking about sort of how retrofitting works and what equipment they can keep and what equipment they would have to get rid of. So the first one was someone has radiator heat with a boiler and no central air and no ductwork. No ductwork. How would this work for them? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yes, and that's a complicated, and there's not a simple answer to that because there are a gazillion different applications of hot water heating. And I will tell you, I'm going to state the obvious that of what everybody already knows. Hot water heating is very popular in the Chicagoland region. I've been in enough homes there to know that it's just very popular. A lot of homes, existing homes, have old school radiator systems, and it's just very, very difficult because hot water heating can be done many different ways. In-floor radiant heat, registers on the floor, old-fashioned, what do you even call those silver things that stand in steam heating? There's a gazillion different ways. In general, retrofit from lower temperature geothermal to high temperature steam type heating with radiant heat doesn't work very well. Okay, it's so hard. I hesitate to even say that because every one of those installations is different. So if you have a newer type home that has in-floor radiant heat, odds are pretty good that a geothermal conversion would work there, and that would be called a water-to-water system. But for most people that would have an old hot water heating registers, that's going to be a very difficult conversion that doesn't typically work very well. And then in that application, if they have no ductwork, that means they probably have no central air conditioning in that home, I'm going to assume. They have window units or no air conditioning whatsoever. So, yeah, and that probably isn't a very suitable answer, but there really isn't a straightforward answer because you can't give an answer. That's too broad a question, Jeff. Sorry.
That's all right.
If people have really specifics on that, email me, and then we can connect up and I can address that one-on-one, and I'm glad to do it. Okay.
Excellent. Great. I'll ask another one that we got several variations of this question. And I know that there's no solid answer on this, but someone asked how much space is required to install a geothermal heat pump loop, and will it work with a small backyard?
again, these are one-on-one questions. And so David's idea of a small backyard and my idea of a small backyard might be two different things. But in general, again, this is a toughie. I can address this easiest by talking about what I have in my front yard, okay? So again, I have 3 loops that are 175 feet deep. The first loop is about right from where I'm sitting right now, about 12 feet behind me in the lawn is this one right here. And then there's spacing, and from out to this one is probably 30 feet. Okay, so does that give you an idea? They run in a straight line. They could be put in a variety of configurations. And if you were really hemmed in space, you could make this 3, could be 2, and you'd require that much less space. Hypothetically, could be 1. That is possible. It's not real common with residential. So it's real hard to say how much space do you need for a loop field. I will tell you that in existing homes with tight lots and mature trees, you might have some serious difficulty getting a loop field in, okay? So where there's a will, there's usually a way. Is it the most logical? And yes, you do have some setback requirements, and we're getting real deep into the weeds here to get into that, because it's like a hypothetical question, a small lot, and what's a small lot to you might not be a small lot to me. So again, I would say most residential lots in the suburbs would be able to handle a loop field, a vertical loop field in general. You get in the city of Chicago on really tight lots with little bungalow homes. Is it possible? Yes. Is it easy? Maybe not. And everyone's going to be different, Jeff. That's the best answer I can give. Those are so broad that there's no one size fits all. Sorry.
Absolutely. And that's okay. And folks, if you did ask a question that perhaps, was a little bit specific to your specific property or situation, we encourage you to sign up for the program, sign up just to get your name on our list, and you will be able to have contact with either John or one of our contractors who might be able to more accurately give you details on if it works for your own property. So
one more thing.
Go right ahead, John.
One more thing, Jeff. When a person signs up on the site assessment and they actually link up with one of the contractors in the program, in virtually every instance, the first thing that's going to happen is there's going to be a phone conversation. And this exact question is going to be one of the first things that's addressed in that phone conversation. Or if somebody wants to call me or email me, we can address the same thing. And usually we get a pretty good idea over the phone, okay? Might not be perfect, but I'll bet 90% of the time you can get a pretty good answer to that one just over the phone.
Excellent. Thank you so much for answering that one. I've got a specific one here that I think is a really good question to ask. So I'm going to ask, can you address sort of some of the problems with potential like refrigerant contamination? Is there any kind of leakage into the environment from the refrigerants in these systems?
No. That's the best I can do. There's no leakage of any refrigerant. There's a very mild antifreeze solution that don't think of it as antifreeze as in your car. It's an antifreeze solution that's put into the closed loop system. Think of it in most of the Chicagoland area. Think of it as glorified sugar water almost. I'm making light of it, but it's what glycol is. It's pretty harmless, and you don't use antifreeze in the loop field because you're worried about the loop freezing underground. Remember, the ground is the same year round. Your coldest spot in the loop is going to be where the fluid comes out of the geothermal unit. Remember, in heating mode, you're extracting heat out of that loop and sending it back to the earth to get conditioned. So just as a safety precaution, you would like to have the antifreeze solution in the loop. And then there is a refrigerant that's put into the unit itself. It's almost, for purposes of this discussion here tonight, it's much like your refrigerator. That's the way you should think about it. The technology is very, very similar to a refrigerator. And no, I have never in my life, and I've been around this a long, long time, heard of any issue with any refrigerant causing the kind of problems that I think you're alluding to, and the participant there is alluding to. Again, I'd be glad to talk more about that, but that's kind of a non-issue. Well, it's not kind of a non-issue, it's very much a non-issue.
Great. I suspect that's probably the answer we all wanted to hear. So thank you, John. Appreciate that. We have another sort of question right here, which is, can geothermal work with subfloor hydronic radiant heating and regular air AC? So is it compatible with those systems?
Yes. So remember earlier I said, when we were talking about hot water heating, and I said if somebody has in-floor radiant heat, typically done with a boiler, a mini boiler, probably driving that heating, providing the in-floor radiant heat. And typically this probably wouldn't be in a home that was built 40 or 50 years ago. This would be in a home that was probably of the vintage of the last 20 years, if I'm going to generalize, or in a home that was remodeled and they already have the tubing put in. Assuming that the tubing is put in a way that's compatible with geothermal, and I'm going to guess that very often that would be true. That would work. That conversion could work very easily. And then what was the second part of it, Jeff?
That is with normal air source air conditioning.
Yes, and that would be simply a matter of replacing the air conditioner or the air source heat pump with the geothermal system. And there's actually, I think, 2 manufacturers. I know of one. I'm pretty sure there's 2 now that make a system that does both. Not every manufacturer makes that. So you could actually put in 2 systems, one for the water to water for the radiant heat, one for the water to air for the summer for cooling, or you could put in that combo unit that does both. Either way accomplishes the same thing. And so, yep, very possible.
Great, excellent. Here's one question that you may have touched on in the presentation, but I got it enough in the chat that I want to put it out there very, very plainly. Some people are asking, do you have to get a specific hot water heater to work with the geothermal heat pump, or does it connect to any water heater?
You would never connect a geothermal system to a gas water heater. Okay. In most cases, you just don't do that. You can't do that. In most cases, the whole objective of putting in a geothermal system is to get rid of the gas. Okay. So it would make not so much sense to keep a gas fired water heater in the first place. I tend to, this is a personal thing, I tend to recommend a very high quality water heater, and I hesitate to state brand names, but the 2 pictures you saw were Marathon water heaters, and it's what I have in my own home. I would never recommend anything but that because they last forever. So if you're connecting a geo system to a water heater, the last thing you want to do is to use a quote unquote cheap water heater that's going to spring a leak rust out and spring a leak in 5 or 6 years. And then you've got to go through that whole rigmarole of replacing that water heater with that desuperheater attached to it. It's just better to spend a little more money and do it the right way and put in a Marathon water heater or one that's similar, like the one I have that's about 5 feet from me, that's a fiberglass tank water heater that will still be in operation after I'm dead and gone, and whoever else is living in my home, it'll still be there. That's the smart way to do it. Did that take care of that? So, yep, if you want to cut corners and put in a cheap one that's going to rust out and leak in 5 years, knock yourself out. It's not a very smart thing to do, in my opinion.
Sounds good. Thank you for that answer. Appreciate that, John. We had a couple of folks who are asking about the life expectancy of a geothermal heat pump system. Just in general, like how long it lasts, especially in comparison to standard HVAC equipment.
Part of the beauty of geothermal is there's nothing sitting outside. So you just use your imagination with a central air unit or an air source heat pump. Where's it sitting? It's sitting on a slab outside in the ice and snow and heat and wind and out in the elements. With geothermal, if you hearken back to those slides of my own home, the indoor equipment is indoors. Again, in my instance, about 5, 6, 7 feet from me here. And everything else is underground. So there's nothing exposed to the elements. So there's two parts to that, because there's two key parts. One's the loop field. That's the loop field. Piping is guaranteed for 50 years. Frankly, there's two enemies of a geothermal loop field. One's a trencher or a backhoe that is doing work in a yard, and there's no excuse for digging up a geothermal loop field. It shouldn't happen. Once in a blue moon it does. And if that happened, you're going to damage the loop field. But the other, I guess, would be conceivable if we ever had a really major earthquake. And in that instance, we got bigger fish to fry. Those are the two, in my world, those are the enemies of the outdoor portion, the piping. This stuff is virtually indestructible. It's guaranteed for 50 years. I think for all intents and purposes, it'll be in the ground. It'll last forever. And there's no reason it shouldn't last forever. On the inside of the mechanical equipment, I think a typical lifespan of the indoor equipment is 25 years. A typical lifespan of a gas furnace and a central air unit would be less than 15. And the systems last a long, long time. I know geothermal systems, mechanical systems, the indoor equipment out there that are still in operation that are 30, 35 years old. Again, it's like everything else in life. The new stuff is so much more efficient. And I put my system in 1999. I replaced my indoor equipment about 4 years ago. I didn't replace it because I was having trouble. My system never had a service call on it in 17 years, 18 years. Nothing ever went wrong with it. I just wanted to have a new one. I knew the new ones would be more efficient, have more bells and whistles, probably a little more comfort. It would just be better, and I just wanted it. That's the best way I can describe it. I didn't need it. My old system worked fine, and I just replaced the inside equipment. The loop field was my original loop field. Okay, so when you do a replacement of the mechanical equipment, that's actually quite a bit easier because you don't need to install a new loop field. Hopefully that helps on that one.
Thank you so much, John. All right, getting a little bit low on time, but we still have a lot of questions to get through. So if you're willing to hold on a little longer, I will ask at least to get through as many as we can here. So let me see. A lot of people were curious about the potential impacts of the drilling on either their house or nearby houses. Is there any risk to damaging foundations or of other houses in the neighborhood that would need to be considered before installing a loop?
I've never heard of anything like that. This isn't fracking. Consider the loop installation as being really similar to installing a water well. There is nothing like that. In fact, when you put the loop in, it's just going to be a novelty that everybody's going to be interested in, frankly. But I've never heard of anything like that. Obviously, they need to connect the system. If you remember the slide where the two pipes come out of the hole in the floor of the basement, I saw one just the other day where a contractor basically drilled a hole in the wall of the house about like that to run the two pipes through. Other than that, nothing like that, Jeff. I've never heard of anything like that.
Sounds good. And yeah, I can understand why people might be concerned about that, though, if they're imagining digging in their backyard, but it's not that kind of digging, as you said, John. It's not fracking. So thanks for answering that one. Appreciate that. Right, let me see. So one person asked an interesting logistical question, which I thought might be good to ask everyone. How does the installation work when you already have a furnace? Since installation takes some time, as you mentioned, it can't be yanked out during the installation because then they would be without heat. Do you have any thoughts or advice on the season that's best to install, or how folks can handle their heating and cooling during the installation process?
Well, that's kind of difficult to answer. Obviously, it's the installation of the loop field. I can tell you, hearkening back to 1999, my loop field was put in on about January 3rd. We had about 8 inches of snow on the ground, and it probably wasn't very fun putting the loop field in that day. It was single digits. That wouldn't have been the perfect day to pick. Was the day we had, but you can do it that way. You obviously are not going to put a loop field in anywhere when it's 10 below, or, it's just, you have to follow common sense. So nice weather works better. Typically, the 9 non-winter months are the best. Chicago is going to be a little colder than Springfield. So that's not to say that loop fields can't be put in the winter. They're put in all winter long. It just makes for a tougher installation. Okay. And, but they can be done. Typically, a residential loop field in a typical home, again, every home's different, but in a typical home, this part right here for a vertical loop field, this is going to be 1 or 2 days of drilling. Okay. In my case, in central Illinois, it's pretty easy mud drilling. That took 1 day. That was put in 1 day. In the Chicagoland region, that job might be, on a typical average house, that might be a 2-day job. And then the inside work is typically, once the contractor has the equipment, that's the inside change out of the mechanical equipment. That's 1 day. And then the tying the two systems together, that's another day. So I'm making it sound really easy. That's 3 pretty tough parts that have to come together, but that's basically how it works. And so no contractor is going to ever let anybody without heating in the dead of winter. They're going to keep you in heating. That change out is going to be done. They typically probably wouldn't schedule it if they didn't have to on a day that was 15 below zero. Frankly, they'd schedule it on a day that was a little milder temperatures. They'd have that system connected and put in 1 day so that by evening you'd have the Geo system in operation. Okay, so you just, it's a little bit tougher in installation than just changing out a cookie cutter conventional gas furnace with a new gas furnace. That's easy. This is a little tougher, but nobody's ever going to be left without heating or cooling one way or the other.
Great. Thanks, John. And really good question. Thanks for asking. I have one more that I think is sort of a little bit less about the details of the system and a little bit more about contractors and the process. So I thought this was a good one to ask. Someone asks, are the evaluations that are essential to getting the system sized correctly guaranteed in any way? So I think they're looking for a little information about transparency and guarantees on system sizing. So anything you can say about that?
Oh, I've never been asked that. So no, there's no guarantee in life for that type of thing. Here's my personal recommendation on that. I think that most people aren't going to make this kind of investment without getting more than one proposal. I mean, there might be somebody out there who would work that way, but most people are going to talk to, we have 6 contractors in this program. Talk to a couple of them. Let's say you had 2 contractors that give that you're going to work with. And if in a perfect world, they should both come up with the same sizing or at least very close. Now, in any house, you could have the home, the load be right on the border between, say, a 3-ton and a 4-ton, or a 4-ton and a 5-ton. And contractor A is going to say, I feel more comfortable putting in a 5-ton unit for this home because you're kind of right on the border. Contractor B might say, I think 4-ton is going to take care of it. You're going to have to decide as the homeowner which way you want to go. And they can explain that with the energy analysis sheet and show you how that's all calculated. Now, if somebody comes up with this versus this down here, and they have nothing to do with each other, which frankly, you're not going to get from any of the 6 contractors in this program because they're all pretty solid professionals. But if you get outside of the program from contractor X that I've never even heard of, yes. Is there any guarantee? No, there isn't. Yeah, I've never been asked that. That's an odd question. Peculiar. That's a peculiar one. Just know that it's important. I can tell you that in ComEd's incentive program, ComEd requires, I work with them pretty closely, they require the load calculation and the energy analysis in order to get their incentive. So there's no guesswork.
Thanks for taking a stab at that. It was an interesting question as well. So
it is interesting. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Wish I had a better answer for it, but no, there's no question. There's no guarantee on the sizing. Just one of those things that has to be done properly.
Absolutely. And to speak to that a little bit, I'm not sure it was mentioned much in the presentation, but the contractors that we are working with for this program are all accredited through GAOI, which is the organization that our friend John happens to direct. And so all of these companies that would be working through our program, there is some level of accountability already in terms of that they have an accreditation from a statewide body they've sort of been vetted a little bit. So it's not a guarantee, certainly, but it is, these aren't fly-by-night folks who don't know geothermal. If they're in this program and they have John's stamp of approval, they tend to know what they're talking about. So I just thought I'd throw that in there as well. All right,
and
folks,
a requirement of this program is that they hold our company credential, not an individual credential. There's a big difference. So our company credential, we give that company credential when a company has at least 75% of their technicians that have been through our training or at least our testing process. And we've had about 500 technicians in the state now that have gone through and passed our credential exam. So we're pretty proud of that. That's frankly a high standard that is unprecedented. I don't know of any program anywhere that has a credentialing standard that's even close to that.
Thank you, John.
So we've done our best to ensure quality.
Absolutely. And that's part of the reasons to join a program like this, where you know that you don't have to shop and start from scratch and work with contractors who you don't know have a history with this technology. So definitely one of the benefits of going geothermal with us. So folks, we have a lot of questions left, a whole lot. Unfortunately, it's 8:30, and I think we need to give our presentation team time to head off for the evening. So what we will do is you're more than welcome to reach out to any of us who are on your screen right now. John will, as you might predict, have many of the answers that you are probably seeking, but you're free to email some or all of us if you have questions that we didn't get to tonight. We did save all of our questions, so if some folks have a really substantive question that we would like to get back to you on in detail, we may send an email your way using the email that you registered with Zoom for this Zoom webinar for, just because we really appreciate your time tonight, and we appreciate the really great questions you asked. We just wish we had hours to answer them all, but unfortunately, I think we have to wrap things up. So I would just want to say thank you all so much for coming. We do have many more of our geothermal power hours scheduled. We have a couple in April and May, and we will be continuing to offer them throughout the summer and possibly potentially in the fall as well. So if you want to hear this again, or you had some questions and would like to come to, frankly, to a power hour with fewer participants, we had a whole lot of folks here, which is great. You are welcome to sign up for one of those, or you are welcome to reach out via email to any of us. Or if you sign up with that link that I added earlier, and that will be in your follow-up, that will also connect you with our team, and you can ask further questions of the contractors or of us during that part of the process. So
yep, Jeff, and I just put the emails back up there, and hey, I'd be tickled to death to have 10 questions in my inbox in the morning. So go ahead and email me if you have any questions that we didn't address, and I'd be glad to take a stab at it. And
wonderful.
Thank you for being here tonight.
Yes, and I want to say a thank you on behalf of everyone to you, John, for giving the bulk of the presentation and gifting us all your knowledge. We really appreciate that. And we're very excited to keep this program going. Folks, this is our first power hour, so thank you for bearing with us as we went a little bit over time, but we really appreciate you being here, and we look forward to your questions, to providing you guidance as you maybe begin your geothermal journey. And unless anyone else has anything else to add, I think I will say thank you very much. We appreciate you being here this evening, and have a wonderful night.